Dear respected Thai, dear noble Sangha, today is the 11th of November in the year 2018, and we're in the Loving Kindness Temple, New Hamlet, in our Rains retreat. And there's an interesting topic today, true love. Ooh. So I've been asked to share about the 14th mindfulness training. We've been studying the 14 mindfulness trainings during this Rains retreat, and we know that the order of the trainings is not so important, but how we practice them in our lives is very important. And I was not there at the meeting when I was assigned to share about this mindfulness training. So I tried to look deeply and see what my elder brothers and sisters have in mind. And what do I have to share about this topic of true love? So Thai teaches us that the 14 mindfulness trainings are the very essence of the order of interbeing. They are the torch lighting our path, the boat carrying us, the teacher guiding us. They allow us to touch the nature of interbeing in everything that is, and to see that our happiness is not separate from the happiness of others. To see that our happiness is not separate from the happiness of others. Interbeing is not a theory, it is a reality that can be directly experienced by each of us at any moment in our daily lives. The 14 mindfulness trainings help us cultivate concentration and insight, which free us from fear and the illusion of a separate self. And so during this Rains retreat, we've been studying how to let go of our views. Thai introduced these trainings in the middle of the American War in Vietnam, when the ideologies of communism and maybe I can say capitalism or maybe anti-communism were dividing families, tearing brother from brother, splitting the Sangha. And Thai and Sister Shan Kong suffered very deeply because of this attachment to views that they saw around them. And they said, how can we train ourselves in such a way that we do not become caught up in the views that are dividing our close friends, our family? It was not just a matter of sitting around and saying, oh yeah, I see there's some good points about communism. I don't really like the communists. It's not really like that. It's a matter of life or death. Which side you're on. And that is something we are not very used to in the way of living that we are experiencing here in Plum Village, and here in modern times, where we feel we can share our ideas just as we feel in our heart. And so the first few trainings are dealing with our views and how to become free from views. We also looked into consumption, how the things that nourish our body and mind, edible food, sense impressions, volition, consciousness, contribute to how we experience this present moment and how we will continue into the future. So a lot of the trainings have to do with how we're nourishing through our eyes, our ears, our nose, tongue, body and mind. We know that we are what we ingest, and both in terms of physical food and in terms of sense impressions, in terms of how we set our mind, our volition, and in terms of consciousness. So today we're going to look into a very powerful and delicate topic, which is the energy that has brought us here over hundreds of millions of years. And so it's not something to be treated lightly, to dismiss lightly. Sometimes we call it sexual energy, the energy of reproduction. You can say a kind of vital life force. However we want to call it, it is that which is impelling us from within to continue into the future, not just in this physical body, but in successive generations. And so the 14th mindfulness training invites us to look deeply into this area of sexual energy. So I'll start by reading the trainings, and then we'll practice looking deeply into it together. The 14th mindfulness training, True Love. So there are two parts. There's a section for lay practitioners and a section for monastics. The 14 mindfulness trainings are one of the roots of the trainings, the Bodhisattva precepts, which were quite popular in East Asia, also in Tibet. And that those precepts were for bodhisattvas. That included both monastic and lay practitioners. So the inspiration of the trainings are these bodhisattva precepts. And Thai has revisioned them, updated them to be relevant for our modern time. So this training in particular has a separate section for lay practitioners and for monastics. So for lay members, aware that sexual desire is not love, and that sexual relations motivated by craving cannot dissipate the feeling of loneliness, but will create more suffering, frustration, and isolation. We are determined not to engage in sexual relations without mutual understanding, love, and a deep, long-term commitment made known to our family and friends. Seeing that body and mind are one, or in unison, we are committed to learning appropriate ways to take care of our sexual energy and to cultivate loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness for our own happiness and the happiness of others. We must be aware of future suffering that may be caused by sexual relations. We know that to preserve the happiness of ourselves and others, we must respect the rights and commitments of ourselves and others. We will do everything in our power to protect children from sexual abuse and to protect couples and families from being broken by sexual misconduct. We will treat our bodies with compassion and respect. We are determined to look deeply into the four nutriments and learn ways to preserve and channel our vital energies, sexual, breath, spirit, for the realization of our bodhisattva ideal. We will be fully aware of the responsibility of bringing new lives into the world and will meditate regularly upon their future environment. In the training for monastics, aware that the deep aspiration of a monk or a nun can only be realized when he or she wholly leaves behind the bonds of sensual love. We are committed to practicing chastity and to helping others protect themselves. We are aware that loneliness and suffering cannot be alleviated through a sexual relationship, but through practicing loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness. We know that a sexual relationship will destroy our monastic life, prevent us from realizing our ideal of serving living beings, and harm others. We will learn appropriate ways to take care of our sexual energy. We are determined not to suppress or mistreat our body, or look upon our body as only an instrument, but will learn to handle our body with compassion and respect. We will look deeply into the four nutriments in order to preserve and channel our vital energies, sexual, breath, spirit, for the realization of our bodhisattva ideal. Maybe we can hear the sound of the bell. So we know that the Buddha had as far as we know, the Buddha had a partner, was married, had a child, and as a young man he had the things that were considered appropriate for a wealthy young man, that is access to many young women, a kind of standing in society. So he had the experience before and during his marriage of sexual relations. And then he made a very interesting decision. to leave home and to go forth into the forest. He saw a monk who was living very simply in the forest. He saw kind of joy, maybe, happiness. And he realized that to realize that kind of joy, he needed to change his life. He needed to make a deep change. And at that time in India, when a young man decided to go and live as a wanderer, that also meant practice we call brahmacharya, which literally means moving with Brahma. Brahma is like God, or could be the whole universe. But brahmacharya specifically meant to practice chastity. Yeah, so it specifically meant, many of us know it from in the 4 stages of life in the tradition of Hinduism. The brahmacharya is the time when you are a student. You're expected to practice celibacy because you are learning and studying the way. And only when you complete that stage do you go on to then have a family. So the Buddha followed his instinct. I'm not sure he had a very clear idea of where that would bring him. But he saw there was suffering in his life, and I don't think he thought that suffering was only due to the fact that he was married or because of sexual desire, but I think that he saw that it played a role, and he wanted to understand more deeply the nature of that suffering. And so I see that story not as necessarily as an invitation for us to leave our home and become a monk or a nun, although you're welcome if you like to do that. But it's a way of looking deep, of recognizing the importance of looking deeply into this energy within us that is transmitted to us in an unbroken chain for more than 500 million years, more than 2 billion years possibly, that has arrived in the form of every cell of our body, and the need to continue, the need to reproduce for future generations. There were many living beings, or something like a living being, that didn't continue. And so they are not our ancestors. Yeah. It's not that every one of our ancestors had strong sexual desire, but this desire has been transmitted to us. That is why we are here. Without that attraction between the male and the female of a species, it's unlikely that we would bother to come together as 2 bodies and in such a way that we can continue in sexual intercourse. It's very unlikely without that desire, without those feelings. And so it's quite understandable that we feel it very strongly, at least many of us, because through many generations that force, that energy has been selected over and over and over and over and over again. It is true that due to human culture, there have been there have been lines which have continued, which were not so much based on sexual desire, For example, we know in Europe as well as India and China, many times marriages were arranged. The two people had very little choice. Maybe it had to do with diplomacy. But overall, I think we can safely say that the desire within us to come together as a man and woman, or even, for the moment we speak about the coming together as man and woman, has been selected and become stronger, perhaps, and stronger and stronger. That doesn't mean that there are not other kinds of sexual attraction, like between two men or two women. It seems clear that is also part of the process. But certainly the desire between a man and a woman has been cultivated in, you could say, when we look deeply with the eyes of non-self. We don't think this body is only me, but we see ourselves only as a stream continuing our ancestors. Then we can look deeply into that stream and we see that certain things have evolved. And for example, certain things have fallen away. In the summer retreat, I love to watch the children climbing trees. And when I look deeply into them scampering up a tree and with such ease and just hanging out there, sometimes just swinging by one arm, and when my worry and fear dissipates, then I look deeply and I see that I can see my ancestors, our ancestors, who also lived in trees, who slept in trees, who, like me at that age, were very adept at knowing where to put their feet, where to grab onto the branch. They could test whether the branch would hold, whether it was dry and might break, or whether it was limber but too thin. All that wisdom is passed on to us in our hands. And the process of an embryo developing is often related to our own evolutionary development. It's very difficult for an untrained eye to tell the difference between the embryo of a human being and the embryo of a chicken, for example. And so in the same way, our evolutionary past can be viewed through the development of a young person. And so as we go through puberty and our body develops, then we lose that capacity somewhat. And that mirrors our own development as human beings. It seems because the climate became cooler in Africa and we needed to go out into the grasslands and walk long distances to maybe find roots to dig for or even learn how to hunt. Then our Achilles tendon became longer. The arch in our foot became more rigid. Our neck developed the capacity to keep our head steady even when we are walking and running and upright. And so that development also came with certain things that fell away, which is our capacity to, for example, hold on to a branch with our feet. It's very difficult if you ever try. Climbing a tree only with your feet. It was no longer so useful anymore. What was more useful was that we could run across the savannah. So I share that story so we don't look at this process of impermanence of this stream of ancestry as always going in the direction of things getting better. That is a wrong perception. It is selecting for what is appropriate in the present moment. That is a better way to talk about evolution. Selecting for what is most appropriate and adaptive to the present moment. But that takes time. Time much vaster than we are normally capable of imagining. And so here we are in this situation in the present moment where our environment is changing more quickly than we're able to adapt. So it's a very interesting moment. And I think already in the time of the Buddha had an idea about that. He had an insight. He saw we're not quite adapted to living in these dusty houses. And so he left the home and went to live in the forest. In a way, reliving the ancestral evolutionary heritage. Using his own body as a kind of laboratory for understanding who he really is. Another way of saying that, how am I most adapted to be, to live? And so I invite you to look at the path of the Buddha and his life story and the community he's built up in that light, in the light of the ancestors, the ancestral lineage, and finding our true home. Finding our true home. You can listen to the sound of the bell. In the list of Buddhist mental formations, there's one called Jivitendriya. Jiva is life, and Indriya is a faculty, the faculty of life, life energy, kind of life force that is impelling us forward to have a continuation in the future. When I started practicing, I took this sexual energy as a core part of my practice, looking deeply into it in my sitting meditation, because I knew I wanted to become a monk. But about a year after I made that resolution inside, then the seed of wanting to be a father came up in me, to have a family. And I was at Maple Forest Monastery in Vermont. Sister Shanduk was there. And at the summer retreat, and I remember being in a Dharma sharing, and there were a few monastic sisters there. And I shared about that. Somehow, until that point, I was, I think, 26 maybe? 26 years old. maybe it sounds a little bit selfish, but I speak honestly as a young man. I didn't really think very much about having a family. But that doesn't mean I didn't have sexual relationships. Yeah, so, and yeah. But actually taking the decision to become a monk, it somehow changed my mind. And over the course of a year of practicing, I saw this strong urge coming up inside of me. A lot of it was based on the happiness I'd experienced as a young man in my family. You know, thinking about vacations or going water skiing at my house with my dad and my mom, or going ice skating in the winter, or you know, all those warm, happy memories of childhood. And they came up very strongly, kind of a warm feeling inside my chest. And so I shared about it in a Dharma sharing group. And it felt so healing just to be able to share about that. It was the first time I'd ever shared, really, I think, to anyone. And one of the sisters there, Sister Susan, some of you might remember, she shared something that I always remember. It affected me very deeply, which is, some of you might know she was in our community for many years, and she lived in a practice community before coming to Plum Village. And in that community, she was not a celibate nun at first. She had a family. And what she shared with me was that as a monk or a nun, we become part of the human family. Our love knows no bounds. We're no longer just containing our love to one blood family. And we can see ourselves in some way, shape or form as the father, the brother, the mother, the sister, the daughter, the son, in every situation. And that was like, that allowed that feeling that I had so strongly, that I could not separate from sexual desire. You know, I saw it's connected. It allowed it to suddenly be released. Not that it disappeared, but it just released. It no longer had I realized I had put a boundary around that emotion, which was bounded by my memories of my family, bounded by the accepted norms of society, which don't include becoming a monk or a nun, at least where I grew up. And so so I had seen myself taking this path of awakening, which was outside of that boundary, that could not be easily explained to those around me. And I suddenly felt isolated, alone. And that warm energy, this kind of life energy, seemed to be bounded within this idea, this framework of a family like I'd known growing up. And so in that moment, listening to that sister share, another sister shared, I felt whole again. I felt like there was no longer a boundary there. And so this energy was able to manifest. So on the one hand, I don't have to push it down. I can give it its true flowering. I can allow it to come out, not being separated from what I love, but as seeing myself as being one with it, one with the Sangha, one with our teacher, one with whole human family, all living beings, and so forth. So this touching this vital energy, which Thai talks about in the trainings, is very important in understanding its nature. Thai talks about 3 aspects of this energy. We will look deeply into the 4 nutriments. Remember we learned, I think a few weeks ago, edible foods, sense impressions, volition, and consciousness. In order to preserve and channel our vital energy, sexual, breath, spirit, for the realization of our bodhisattva ideal. This is how we learn appropriate ways to take care of our sexual energy. This is kind of tight. So the way that I practiced and I learned from Thai to work and understand this energy, work with and understand it, was by using mindfulness of breathing. So in the practice of mindfulness of breathing, we start with awareness of the in and out breath. Right, the first step. Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. So we start with the breath. In fact, the breath goes all through. So this vital energy that is nourishing every cell in our body, passing through our bloodstream, generating respiration within every cell of our body. It is nourishing us. There's a story you might know. A species that reproduces on the planet Earth so successfully that expands to fill every corner of its ecological niche. After it discovers a way to exploit the carbon it finds in its environment. Its presence dominates to such an extent that it drastically changes the composition of the atmosphere. Other species must adapt to this new toxic environment or die out completely, and extraordinary numbers of species do go extinct. Anybody know what species this is? Yeah, everyone's pointing this way. Yeah, it sounds familiar. It's a species called Cyanobacteria. Anyone ever heard of Cyanobacteria? Okay, one hand goes up. Thank you. A happy farmer, not surprisingly. Hopefully you know what Cyanobacteria is. Now we call it chloroplast. And it's located in every plant cell. It is the motor and the energy generating structure within pretty much, I think, every plant on the planet today. And about 2.4 billion years ago, a little bacteria, very much like modern chloroplast, was floating around in the surface of the ocean. And it had evolved the capacity to receive sunlight and carbon from the atmosphere. So taking the CO2 from the atmosphere and releasing the O2, it means the oxygen, dioxygen, out into the atmosphere. And eventually when all of the natural, like water and elemental repositories for binding that oxygen were filled, then that oxygen went into the atmosphere. It's sometimes called the Great Oxygenation Event. Before that, most living beings were anaerobic. They could not survive in an oxygen-rich environment. Many scientists now believe those organisms formed in deep ocean vents, where hot gases were coming out from the center of the earth. And over millions and billions of years, they developed a kind of lifelike quality. And so out of that lineage came this Cyanobacteria, which for the first time was able to take the energy from the sun rather than energy from other sources and transform carbon dioxide into oxygen. And that is why today we can breathe. So all that oxygen favored those species that could learn to respire. They were able to develop respiration. So in every cell of our body we have cells which are able to take oxygen and use it in order to generate energy along with the sugars from the food we eat. So without that great event, we would not be here. So depending on how you want to look at the situation, Cyanobacteria was a great destroyer of the world atmosphere, or the great renewer. It depends on which side you take. The anaerobic side or the aerobic side. So I tell that story a little bit to understand why the Buddha emphasized mindfulness of breathing. It is nourishing every cell in our body when we breathe in and out. And by being aware of our breath, we are also honoring our evolutionary heritage, our ancestral heritage, as an aerobic living being. So we start with awareness of the in and out breath, and then continue with following the in and out breath. So we develop concentration. Thai will often say, it's like this marker is our breath, and our finger is our attention. So with the in-breath, we become aware as the breath starts to come in through the whole length of breathing in. So our finger stays with the breath the whole way. And then with the out-breath, it's the same, breathing out. And then from time to time, our attention goes off. We start thinking, worrying about the future, the past. And so we just smile, because we are practitioners, and we know to bring our attention back to the breath as it goes in and out. That is the training, following the in-breath all the way through, and following the out-breath all the way through. Concentration is not so complicated. You don't have to go like this to concentrate. You just continue to maintain your mindfulness over time. And then we become aware of our body. So this awareness of the breath actually brings us in contact with our body. So we see that this process of respiration is not only the air moving in through our mouth and into our lungs, but it's also continuing into our bloodstream to relax our body, to generate energy, to contribute to this vital energy. So breathing in, aware of the body. One thing that's so relaxing about listening to our teacher talk is that during the whole time of talking, Thai maintains his awareness of his breathing. So he's relaxed. Usually when we hear people speak, they speak very quickly just to get all the information out, and then you feel more stress, and everybody feels stressed, and then they just want to get out of there. But with Thai, you want to stay there for a long time, sometimes an hour or 2 hours, almost 3 hours. And somehow you feel calm and at peace. And so that is how Thai trained us. Even when we are speaking, whether we are walking, whether we are eating, to maintain this awareness of the body and the breath. And by doing that, we relax the body. Or calm the body. Maybe calming. When our mind is caught in an emotion like anger, we don't need to go much farther than the breath to understand what is happening. Our breath becomes short, our muscles constrict. So by being aware of the body, we can tell anger is manifesting. Our body is telling us. Sometimes the mind is quite tricky. Say, me? I'm not angry. But the body knows. The breath knows. So that's why we start by being aware of the body. And when we are relaxed, when there's nothing disturbing our mind, and our attention is fully on our body, then we naturally become calm. So this is developing the breath throughout all the 16 exercises of mindful breathing. We're developing the breath, the vital energy of the breath, and understanding of this breath. But particularly, as we start out, we start with the breath. In the next section of practice, everybody got this? I think you all know this, right? We learn to generate joy. I remember when I first practiced mindfulness of the body, the feelings, the mind, and phenomena. When I first discovered the mindfulness, the establishments of mindfulness sutra, I discovered that it was possible to generate joy within me without depending on anything outside. Nothing that I bought, no movie that I watched, not even a thought, like a memory of a happy time or happiness in the future. That it was actually possible to learn to touch the source of joy in my mind, in my body, and allow it to come up like a wellspring. For me, that was a huge freedom. Suddenly, I felt not bound by outside circumstances. Of course, it didn't last so long, because that joy went away, and then I learned I have to do this regularly. So I committed right away to sitting every morning when I woke up in the morning, and also in the evening. I was very diligent. I was quite strict because of that joy, touching that joy, and I didn't need anyone else to tell me what to do. It came from within me. It wasn't like the brothers knocking on my door, "Hey, get up for sitting meditation." Or my mentor yelling at me because I'm sleeping in. That joy, that's what I wanted. I wanted to be able to cultivate that joy so that it could stay around for a long time. And I wanted to learn how to do it. I wanted to learn techniques that would help me to do that. And the next one is generating happiness. So, most of us have learned these before, but I share them again in order for us to create a foundation for looking into this sexual energy. Because when we're able to generate joy and happiness, that is not dependent on sexual craving. That is the first step of freedom. Nowadays, there's images and sounds we can get at the touch of a button on the internet. I can touch the seed of sexual craving in us. In a moment of we are tired, we are lonely, we are looking for some joy, some happiness. All we have to do is press one key, and there it is. Even I've heard of some men that even just opening their computer touches the seed of sexual desire in them. The conditioning is so strong, they don't even need the image. Just turning on their computer touches the seed of sexual desire. We can listen to the sound of the bell. And I invite you to look in yourself. Now we will go into looking at the sexual energy in our own body and mind. To see if you can look deeply and touch its nature in your mind's eye with the sound of the bell. So, was your meditation successful? It's for me. It's not difficult. Right away, I can get in touch with that energy in my body, because it's something that I practice with almost every minute throughout the day, at least once. And that's I'm not embarrassed to say that. That is just part of. I've been a monk for 15 years, so it's 15 years of celibacy, and not a single day has gone by where I haven't, to some degree, had to look deeply into the energy, this sexual energy in my body. And so it's a very actually easy meditation for me to share about. I never talked about it so much, like in a big Dharma talk like this, but but I feel very at ease, because I know when I'm touching that seed of sexual desire, inviting it to come up. I know how to invite it to go back down. I know when there are moments when I'm sad or angry or lonely, and I'm just looking for some way to stimulate that seed of sexual desire. But I know also how to, when that fever passes, my brother the other day described it like a fever. When we get sick and then the temperature of our body goes up, it's a little bit like that. You feel the fever, it comes and then it goes. And so as monks and nuns we become skillful in how to handle that energy with love and care, not pushing it down, but knowing how to remove the water, the nutriment, to that seed. So that is the next part. So when we've learned how to touch the seed of joy and the seed of happiness, we can become aware of the sexual energy, sexual desire. So it has a form. It feels a certain way. And in the body, when we learn to understand it, and especially when we learn to cultivate joy and happiness without touching that seed yet. So you touch joy and happiness that's not tainted by sexual desire. So that helps you to grow your understanding of its nature. So you learn how to be a skillful gardener in the garden of your mind. Many people, they don't know how to separate. They don't know what is oregano and what is basil, for example. How many of us don't know what oregano looks like? You can be honest, thank you. Right, and so if you don't know what oregano looks like, and most of us know what basil looks like probably, right? Because sometimes they put it on the pizza, so it's easy. They put oregano, but it's already ground up, so it's not so clear. Yeah. So a good gardener knows what to do to plant oregano, and what to do to... Actually, we don't have to plant it here in France. You find it everywhere in the ditches. But we know how to plant basil. And so we also know to tell the basil from the weeds. Yeah, maybe there are certain weeds that are coming up in our garden, and we want to favor the basil. So then we come back to what I shared at the beginning about our modern situation, where the human body is not quite adapted to the environment in which it finds itself. So when we go down to Leclerc to go shopping, and we hear the sound of the love song as we go along, and we just feel, oh, I feel so pleasant, why don't I just buy that? And, because they're very skillful, they know how to water the seed of, not too much, just a little bit, just enough sexual desire in our consciousness, so we have a nice pleasant feeling. We think about, somebody's wailing on the loudspeaker about the love that I will love you forever and ever and ever, and then we think, so it touches that seed in us of our relationship from the past of love when we had that feeling, and so then we just want to buy everything because we feel so good. Oh, that wonderful relationship I had in the past. So I tried to go to Leclerc as little bit as possible. Yeah, and then along the highway we see signs. We talked already about the computer at the push of a button. We see all kinds of pornography. So in this modern environment that we find ourselves in, we're actually not adapted very well to it. We're not used to being stimulated sexually almost non-stop throughout the day in all these subtle ways. And so this original energy, which is there to help us to continue into the future, is being co-opted by our environment, is being conditioned by our environment. So I want to ask you, when you look and you're aware of sexual energy, is it really that life force, or is it just an ad? Is it just a love song? Is it just an image of the one you love? Or is it really them? They said that we don't fall in love with another person, we fall in love with the image of the other person. And over time, when the image starts to look different than the reality, then suffering appears. So we've already been conditioned by the pictures in the magazine, by the pornography on the internet. We've narrowed down our search on Google to exactly that image of that perfect person. And so when we see her or we see him, we cannot control ourselves. We're overwhelmed. It is the one I've been looking for. But is it that one, or is it just an image in our mind? So that is what the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutra invites us to look into. I'm putting sexual desire here as one of the mental formations. The seventh step is to be aware of mental formations. And so in this case, we are looking into the mental formation of sexual desire. And we learn to calm. We learn its nature so we can calm the energy of sexual desire. And so there are many ways we can learn to do that. In the mindfulness training, it says, we must be aware of future suffering that may be caused by sexual relations. Remember, this is a training. Nobody's forced to train in the 14 mindfulness trainings. A lot of people complain. Long-term commitment? Why can't we just be free? Okay, we can be free as long as you're not in love with an image. And I challenge you to prove that you're not in love with an image of that other person without committing over a long term. I challenge you. Good luck. Because when I first took the 5 mindfulness trainings, which has a very similar line, I didn't. When I first read them, I did not take them right away. But I practiced for a year, and I did an experiment. Sometimes I would fall back on my old habit energies, and then I practiced, just like we learned, following the in and the out breath. I practiced to maintain mindfulness throughout the whole experience of that sexual relationship. Not just the moment that's really interesting, but also the parts that are not so interesting that maybe are related to that experience, right? The ones that come after, sometimes days after, sometimes weeks after, sometimes months. And I can tell you, as a monk for 15 years, sometimes 15 years later, when I'm sitting in meditation. Yeah? And that was because I was in love with an image of the other person. And sometimes that image still comes back. And the infatuation returns. That seed comes up. And I think, oh, it was so lovely. So somehow this seed of infatuation blinds us to what is really going on, what we're really doing in the present moment. And we need to be very careful. And so as monks and nuns, we train in that, to recognize infatuation, attachment when it arises, and not to, smash it to the ground with a hammer, but to just take care of it, to hold it, to embrace. That is the beauty of Thay's transmission to our Sangha. Because in many traditional Buddhist monasteries, you just smash it down. You cut it off. And as we know, when we try to keep the seeds in the earth from sprouting up, then they just spread their roots out, sometimes farther. Sometimes people try with bamboo, you try to cut it and then you cover it up, and then the roots just keep growing out and they find a new place to come up, maybe sometimes 10 meters away. So our sexual desire is like that. If we just push it down like that, it will find other ways to come up. So there's not a healthy circulation of our mental formations. There's not a healthy circulation of this sexual energy. And Thay was trained us as monks and nuns to have a healthy relationship with our sexual energy. And then the aspect of spirit. So we touched on the breath. This 4 is to look into our sexual energy. And then Thay provides this energy called spirit. Spirit. Maybe we can listen to a sound of the bell. Spirit, the word comes from the same root for respire, the breath. But it has to do with our mind. It recognizes that our mind is connected with our breath. So in the next steps of mindful breathing, we become aware of the mind. We're aware of the thoughts that are appearing. When we look deeply into those thoughts, we see that they are providing nourishment for our mental formations, like sexual desire. So we are aware of what our mind is attending to. Do we have an image in our mind? Maybe an erotic image? We hold that, and then we notice that waters that seed of sexual desire in us. It's very simple. We just don't recognize it. We don't take a step back and shine the light of mindfulness on it. So that's what the sutra invites us to do. As we breathe in, I'm aware of my mind. Breathing out, I'm aware of my mind. So aware of what's being put there in our mind, in our mind's eye. When we're attending to the breath, then the breath becomes the object of our meditation. Mindfulness is always mindfulness of something. So we can be mindful of our breath. We can be mindful of You can imagine the face of someone that we find very attractive, and then I can water that seed of sexual desire. So it becomes a source of nutriment. That's what we're doing, day in and day out. And then when we stop, when we shift our attention back to the breath, then that seed is no longer watered. We think this is all me who is doing it, or us. Like, I am the one doing this. But this is a process of conditioning. The nutriments that come in, sense impressions, volition, consciousness. If we cultivate the seed of having many sexual relations, well, that becomes a reality. If we cultivate the seed of being aware of our breathing, of calming our body and my mind, then that becomes a reality. So where we put our attention, what is that there on the plate of our mind? It's like we have food on a plate in front of us. Or maybe it's whatever is open in our computer is coming up on the screen. That's what this is training us to do. At every moment to be aware of what is present in our mind. And then we learn to gladden the mind. So we learn to bring up those kind of thoughts, or to give attention to those things which actually bring about happiness and joy. So we're going down to the root. We learn to generate joy and happiness, and now we're going down to see what is really going on there at the root. How can we provide the kind of nutriment in our thinking, in our attention, that nourishes joy and happiness? It's a mind training. We're training the mind. So we're learning how to sublimate this vital energy who has the manifestation of sexual desire, and we're directing it towards the breath, towards the spirit, towards being aware of also the sexual energy, but not being swept away by that energy, not being just pulled away by the images that we are attached to, infatuated with. And by gladdening the mind becomes peaceful. It is not searching for things outside of itself. It no longer is searching for those images. It is not easily carried away by that music in the supermarket or the advertisement that you see alongside the road. I read a story yesterday from an old student of Thai's. Many of you know Thai is in the Root Temple in Vietnam. He has committed to going back there for the rest of his life. And so many brothers and sisters in the community are in this moment to prepare for maybe many people becoming very interested in Thai's life suddenly, to explain some things about the history of Thai's life. And one of the sisters doing that sent me a link of an old student of Thai named Jim Forrest, who studied at Phap Luu, and also the Buddhist Peace Delegation in Paris in the 1970s. And he told this story where they were walking in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco, which is I think still is a little bit, Michael's nodding his head. Yeah, it's an area I think that is a little bit with the kind of sex shops and these shows and things like that. I think in Paris you also have something like that. And somehow they ended up walking through San Francisco, and they ended up at that. And so Jim told this story where he felt, oh gosh, how did I end up with Thai here in this district? And he just kept his view very straightforward and just kind of was walking by. But then they came to one shop where it was a kind of a show inside, and then Thai turned and he looked. And I get the impression Thai was just looking at, like Thai would look at the autumn leaf or a blade of grass, just with these eyes of wonder, like, because I think in Vietnam this was not very common to have out in the street kind of so enticing images of women to go into this shop. And it said underneath it said, only people over the age of 21 with an ID are permitted to enter. And so then Thai turned to Jim and he said, Jim, are you older than 21? And then Jim said, no, Thai. Of course, Jim was older than 21. But Jim had a deeper insight into Thai's question. Thai was not asking Jim literally, are you over the age of 21? When a Zen master asks you a question, there's many layers of meaning. And so Thai said, good, neither am I. So we did. Of course, Thai was in his 40s, but Thai said, neither am I, so we don't have to go in there. And they continued walking. And I love that story because our normal way of practicing is a kind of like spiritual bypassing, right? We just want to walk by what we have a fear, right? Like the mindfulness training talks us that we have a fear, an illusion of a separate self. And so in order to maintain that illusion of a separate self, we just close off our vision. We just look like that. But Thai stopped and looked. Thai wants to see what is really going on. So there is someone in us that really wants to see what is going on. We don't want to just blind ourselves to the reality. There are young women in there. They are making their living by doing these sex shows. Thai is looking deeply into the situation with compassion. And if we are solid in our practice like that, we are not enticed, we are not pulled in, we are not pulled away by the emotion. And we can smile with this wonder, these eyes of wonder. Not being over 21 means we maintain our innocence, our joy, our wonder of looking at the world. Even if we have suffered in the past, even if we've been over 21 in the past, we can return to that childlike wonder and look at another human being and look at the situation with the eyes of understanding and love and see the suffering that is there. So if we are able to gladden the mind in that way, if we are happy and solid in our joy, then we're not pulled away by these things. And the 11th is to concentrating the mind. So we learn to maintain our awareness over time. So this is connected to following the in-breath and the out-breath. We can become aware of our in-breath and then we maintain that attention over time. And the more we train in that way, the more our concentration becomes steady and solid. We're not easily distracted. Yeah, so even these images come, like Thai standing there, looking at the image of a woman, and we're not pulled away. We're not. That image is there to pull you in. So you pay your money, so you can go in, and then that seed of sexual desire can be watered in you. But if we know how to maintain concentration, then we know when things come in, and they are trying to nourish that seed, and we don't allow them to continue to manifest in our mind consciousness. They do not penetrate deeply. The Buddha often said, it is not that the Buddha doesn't have sexual desire, or anger or sadness. It is that he does not allow those emotions to overwhelm his mind anymore. He has made the decision to cut them off. Yeah. He can see a naked woman, but it doesn't penetrate into touching the seed of sexual desire in his consciousness. Basically, he knows that that is not true freedom, that he cannot find true happiness in a sexual relationship. Only true happiness is only found in ourselves, in this body, in this mind, in cultivating peace, joy, calm, and understanding the nature of our mind. So we're no longer pulled away by these temptations. And if we do have a sexual relationship, we are also not pulled away by the image we have of the other person. We are able to look into their eyes and see them as they truly are. We practice as a meditation. If we are a lay practitioner, we're not committed to, like we as monastics, right? So I don't want you to go away and think, oh my gosh, I have to become a monk or a nun right away. Right? But we have to learn how to take care of that desire within us so that we're not blinding ourselves with infatuation. So that is the understanding this vital energy of spirit, understanding our mind. We have to understand how these things in every moment are stimulating seeds in our consciousness. And then we touch freedom, liberating the mind. The mind is no longer enslaved. We're no longer easily carried away by the images. So dear brothers and sisters, thank you for being here and helping to look deeply into this energy of sexual desire. I encourage you to look into the remaining steps of mindful breathing, concentration on impermanence, letting go, abandoning desire, extinctions of notions, nirvana. In your own practice, we are out of time. But I want to share that as a man and a monk, I'm aware that in our ancestral history that we have a lot of beginning anew to do around this topic. And going into this 21st century, it is I hope we can do it together, that we can learn of the seeds, how we've used violence, power, fear in the past, because we didn't understand what the Buddha was teaching. We didn't know how to put into practice this understanding of sexual desire. And so it's with a lot of humility that we need to learn to begin anew as men, especially with the Me Too movement. It is helping us. It's like a bell of mindfulness to help not only men but mostly men to look deeply into this as a training so that we can transform going into the future and live again or maybe for the first time in real harmony and peace with brotherhood and sisterhood. So I just end with asking you to support. Two of us are going this coming week to a conference on the dignity of the child in the digital world, which is taking place in the United Arab Emirates. Thai has been invited to represent, as a Buddhist leader, to represent the community in looking deeply into the situation with children who are being abused for pornography online. And this is a meeting of many leaders from many different traditions, from Muslim, Christian, and Jewish and other traditions, Buddhist. And so, of course, Thai will not go in person, but two brothers will go, and we'll support him. And so I thank you for being able to share about this topic here today, because and I'm grateful for Thai for putting right in the trainings. We will do everything in our power to protect children from sexual abuse and to protect couples and families from being broken by sexual misconduct. And so I ask you to send energy for the children everywhere who are in a situation like that because of our own incapacity to take care of our energy of sexual desire. They are enslaved to be put online for our own sexual desire. And that is a big bell of mindfulness for us all. So please enjoy walking meditation, and we'll continue next week with more looking deeply into the mindfulness trainings. Thank you so much.